This is the Left in the Forgotten Borough podcast. I'm Andrew Savage, and my usual co-host, Nancy Richards, is off on a cruise. So we wish her some fun in the sun, and we look forward to when she gets back. But we are joined by a very special guest today. We are joined by Mark Levine, current Manhattan Borough President and candidate for New York City Comptroller. Welcome, Mark, to the podcast.
Thank you, Andrew. It's great to be here. Sorry, we can't be hanging with Nancy in the sunshine.
Yeah, right. Well, first of all, thank you for coming on to a Staten Island centered podcast because a lot of times what happens is, and by the way, you're our first citywide candidate to do so. So
Oh,
thank you.
I'm honored.
Yes, and so thank you for coming on. And it's an honor to have a citywide candidate come on because oftentimes we're written off as sort of the red borough, the Trumpy borough. So most Democrats don't come here. The only person really I expect to see on a citywide level coming here this in this cycle is probably Curtis Sliwa.
Yeah.
Um, so just introduce yourself to our listeners and to people on Staten Island, just for those who may not know you.
Well, thank you so much again, Andrew, for having me on and for allowing me to spend some time with you listeners in an amazing borough that is an important part of our political tapestry and one that I care deeply about and where I've been spending a great deal of time. And I know that you're targeted to a listenership of Democrats. And I want to say how much I appreciate the challenge that you face on Staten Island. It's a lot
Oh,
easier for me
yeah.
in Manhattan, where
Mm,
we have an 80-20 advantage.
yeah.
For you, every fight is uphill. And I was with Cliff Hagan this week, who I believe has been a guest on your podcast already.
2 weeks ago,
Um,
yeah.
and I was speaking at the North Shore Democratic Club, and I got to hear him. And I told him, man, I admire you for stepping up in a tough district on the South Shore. This is what Democrats need to be doing. We need to be fighting and contesting every single neighborhood in New York City, on Staten Island and all five boroughs. And that's not always easy, but we got to get our message to the voters. And when we do, we may not win every race, but we're going to win a lot. And I want Democrats from Staten Island to know that I'm with you all the way in this fight. Actually, it's been a very fun week for me because I mentioned I got to go to a meeting of the North Shore Democrats at Jody's,
Yes, I love
and
it. Yes.
last week I was at a meeting of the SIDA, Staten Island Democratic Association, at Ostadina Santina. And actually, next week I'm holding my own event. We're doing a campaign fundraiser on Wednesday. That's going to be at Burrito Bar on Forest Avenue. So I'm touring all the great sites for Democratic venues. It's been wonderful being on the island and seeing so many Democratic activists. The enthusiasm is incredible. It rivals any Manhattan club. You guys have a fighting spirit. This is what we need now. And it's really been a thrill getting to know so many great Democratic leaders on the island.
Well, thank you. Absolutely. Yeah, we are the little engine that could here on Staten Island, the Democrats here in Staten Island. And um, so you've been around, and so I'm sure you've done a lot of introducing yourself at a lot of these meetings, but for our listeners who may not know you or are just meeting you for the first time, how would you describe your record of public service and what do they need to know about you?
Yeah, look, I actually started my career, Andrew, as a public school teacher. I
Really?
had started, yes, like so many Staten Islanders. Oh my
Myself
goodness.
included, myself included.
Oh, one, are you currently teaching?
I am. I rushed back home from school just to get here and to do this interview. So yeah, absolutely.
How are the kids today?
Oh, well, the kids are fine. It's usually other stuff.
Yeah, I know. I know
Yeah,
what you mean.
yeah.
Uh, I taught back in the 90s. It was my first job out of college. I had studied physics in college, and I didn't want to spend my life in the lab, so I became a science teacher. It was a way to share my love of science with the next generation. And I taught in District 7 in the South Bronx. I taught at junior high school 149. And it was an incredible, challenging, life-changing experience for me. I was very active as a U of T member. I was the youngest member of my school's union consultation committee. And, many of my students, I might even say most, if not close to all, had no real connection to the formal financial system. They had no checking accounts or bank accounts or credit cards. For them, it was just check cashing stores and loan sharks and pawn shops. And so I decided to do something about that. And I started a nonprofit. Actually, I founded a community development financial institution, a credit union in Uptown Manhattan called
Okay.
Neighborhood Trust Federal Credit Union. It's kind of like a cooperatively owned bank that is still going strong today. It's made $100 million in small loans, helping mostly low income families in Uptown Manhattan do everything from buy their first home computer, start a small business, get access to a mortgage, and just a project which I'm very proud of that uh, taught me how to run a financial institution. I can read a financial statement in my sleep. I know what it is to try and need to make payroll every 2 weeks. It's turned out to be um, probably the most important preparation in my career for the job I'm currently seeking now,
Yeah.
comptroller. Um, in 2013, I was elected to the New York City Council, again representing Uptown Manhattan, West Harlem, Washington Heights, a little bit of the Upper West Side. I had the honor of chairing the Parks Committee in my first term. I'm a huge advocate for green space, and during that time came to appreciate just the incredible parks on Staten Island and the Staten Island Greenbelt, something that it's just so unique and so defines life on Staten Island. And I know how much investment you need in the upkeep and maintenance, capital projects on Staten Island parks, because I've been there on the ground. Um, Also, was very proud to chair the Jewish caucus in my first term. Been very active on leading for the Jewish community during my time in elective office. In 2018, I became chair of the City Council's Health Committee, and if you are thinking about those dates, shortly after that, we entered into COVID exactly 5 years ago,
I'm so sorry.
and yeah,
Yeah.
well, I mean, I got to tell you, Andrew, when I took over the committee in 2018, the staff was like, "You got a very easy committee, Mr. Chairman.
Oh,
Generally things are very calm." Well,
they lied.
uh,
They lied.
yeah, they sure did. They sure did. Um, but I got to tell you, I put my heart and soul into leading during COVID, into standing up for science and good policy when that was not easy to do politically. And I'm still hit on Twitter to this date by elements of the national right for that. And I'm
Well,
still leading on public health.
and I mean, it's sort of out of it's sort of uncool to be for actual science now, especially given that we have such a lunatic running the health and sciences in our
Yeah, look,
country.
if we have time, I would like to talk about this moment in public health for New York City and the fact that we have falling vaccination rates for measles, and we have, uh,
Please.
uh, yes, well, I guess let me just wrap up on a little bit on the background and the resume. But I was elected borough-wide, partly I think because of my leadership in COVID, to serve as Manhattan Borough President. Now going on about 3.5 years. And it's been an incredible experience leading for the borough. I've really focused on affordability and the housing crisis. We have average rents in Manhattan are over $5,000 a month for market rate apartments. This is
Mhm.
devastating, not just to low wage workers, but to middle class families, nurses, social workers, bus drivers can't afford rents in Manhattan. And frankly, probably not in many parts of Staten Island either.
Yeah.
And so I've really fought to build hundreds of units of affordable housing in the borough of Manhattan, many different neighborhoods. And I'm still fighting that fight. And I have a lot of ideas on how to wage that fight as comptroller. But let's talk about this moment that we're in public health, where you see we have a measles outbreak in Texas.
Yes.
I think
First
something
step.
like a hundred. What's
First step.
that? We had a child die. Contrary to what RFK Jr. said in the cabinet meeting this week, this is not a normal annual occurrence.
No,
It's
it's
been
not.
20 years since we've had a death from measles, and there are a couple dozen more, mostly young children, hospitalized in Texas. And these are very serious cases. People who are
Yeah.
at risk, God forbid, of fatalities.
Hmm.
And uh, before we get too smug in New York, I think it's important to people to understand that the vaccination rate has dropped here too. So-called MMRs, which is the
Me,
vaccination for
yeah,
measles, mumps, and rubella. But talking about measles here, vax rate has dropped for those diseases. And the standard that we measure by is you're supposed ideally you want to have your first shot by 24 months.
right,
And pre-COVID, we were at 94% of kids had at least one shot by turning two, about 24 months, and it's down to, I believe, 81% right now in New York City. So just precipitous drop just in a couple of years in New York, and leaves us vulnerable. And in fact, the health commissioner said at a hearing about a week or two ago, that this keeps her up at night. Like, public health leaders in New York are worried about this. And now we have a guy leading Health and Human Services in RFK who is the number one vax denier in America. And I deeply worry will undermine this further and will undermine public health in New York by cutting funding. We rely on federal funding for things like disease control and monitoring outbreaks and so much more in our public health system that actually do you have kids, Andrew? I should know this.
no, no,
But for your listeners who do, you can get free childhood vaccinations in New York City because of a federal program, right? If that's cut, there are kids who are going to have to pay for parents who are going to have to pay for their kids' vaccinations. There's just it's so many worrisome impacts of having anti-science leadership in public health nationally. One of the many ways, I'm sure we're going to get into this, one of the many ways in which the Trump administration is a threat to New York City in public health, in housing, our fiscal health, and so much more.
yeah.
Transportation, on Staten Island too, and every one of the five boroughs.
Absolutely, and not to mention, I'm not going to go into the weeds on RFK Jr., but his anti-vax stuff also caused 78 deaths in American Samoa
Yes.
from preventable diseases. And so I have a feeling, I think you already answered this when you talked about your investments in and your business in a credit union, but why this seat specifically
Look,
comes?
I could have run very comfortably
Yeah,
for
exactly.
re-election to be Manhattan Borough President. I'm not term limited.
Hmm.
I could have had 4 more years. I love the job of being Borough President. But for me, comptroller, it would really be a dream come true because so much of my life before this has prepared me for this moment. I have a technical background, I have a financial background, I have background in math, um, and this office is really important. I see it as actually being underappreciated.
Yes,
It
yeah.
look, you as a teacher, you're in the teacher's retirement system,
Hmm.
TRS. I presume you enrolled in the
Oh,
pension.
definitely,
Uh,
definitely, yeah.
Smart man. And I mean, there are a lot of current and future public pensioners on Staten Island, and so it's important to say that the comptroller is overseeing pension funds for police, fire, teachers, other Department of Ed employees, and then a vast number of other public employees in New York City. Collectively, this is about $300 billion. This is one of the largest institutional investors on earth, top 10 globally. And that gives us a great responsibility to protect, first and foremost, the assets of retirees and future retirees like you and myself. But also, we can do that while also advancing our values and our goals. And I want to use some of the pension money in a prudent way to invest in affordable housing, to finance affordable housing projects that would not otherwise get built in New York City. It turns out, Andrew, that as hard as finding properties to build affordable housing on is, and that's hard,
Hmm.
it's only the second hardest challenge in getting affordable housing built. There are 300 projects in New York City where we've got the site, we've got the developer, we've got the zoning, and we're waiting for financing. And we're only getting about 30 finance per year through the main vehicle, which is low-income housing tax credits. It's a federal program. New York hits its cap every year. If you've got a church in your neighborhood, Andrew, or your listeners know of one, and there's a parking lot, and the church wants to do the right thing. They don't want to build condos. They want to build affordable housing. They go to HPD. They say, we want to do this. They get approval. You should assume it'll be 10 years before they get through the queue for financing. This is unacceptable. We got
Yeah,
people in homeless shelters.
yeah.
Pension money could help finance projects which are not otherwise getting built or would have to wait for years and years and years to get built. Um, this is one way I want to use the power of the office. But there's so much more. Office is really the main counterweight to the mayor. Audit power over every city agency and oversight, investigations, even subpoena power if needed. And as comptroller, I'm going to use these powers
Oh,
to,
they're
if necessary.
definitely needed. They're definitely needed. I mean, uh, when we say subpoena power and oversight power, that's just over money, correct? Or is it more broad?
No, 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 operational as well. You can do a performance audit. So, look, a lot of this does get back to the question of, are we spending taxpayer money wisely and effectively? Are we producing good programs and services for New Yorkers? A lot of it does come back to financial questions, but you can audit any aspect of operations in any city agency, and I will. Uh, you and I have Department of Ed backgrounds. The process for getting a child evaluated for special ed services
Oh,
is incredibly problematic. It can take years just to get your child evaluated. I'm sure you, as a teacher, have had kids and you have thought there might be a need for an evaluation because this child could have learning challenges. And often it falls on parents to sue to
yeah.
get their kid special ed services. Now, that can be hard for a parent who's got capacity and resources to hire a lawyer, but imagine a working class single parent who's working two jobs, doesn't have time to deal with all that. And so the kid probably languishes
Yeah.
without getting services or maybe without getting evaluated. So this is just one narrow area at Department of Ed where I would like to use the tools of auditing to get to the bottom of it. But there are similar stories to tell, similar challenges in most city agencies. Uh, in homeless services, we have these huge contracts we provide to homeless service providers, and the quality's all over the map. And I'm sure this is true on Staten Island. We have some
Hmm.
homeless service providers who are running good operations and some that are not. We need to understand what's happening there. That is an area that's ripe for audit and so much more. I'm going to use the power of audit. Um, the comptroller approves all contracts. Every contract has to be approved and registered by the comptroller. That's 40 billion a year. There's lots of policy questions wrapped up in that. Any settlement, if you sue the city, God forbid you get hit by a sanitation truck through the city, comptroller approves that. But comptroller should look at patterns there. Are a lot of people getting hit on one certain sanitation truck route? Maybe we can look at that route. Maybe we need to change the route.
So
Uh,
you would
y-
be,
y-
so you would be essentially, so you, if the way that you're talking about using the role of controller, you would be, what, I don't want to use the word Doge because it's
ah,
so, you would be a legitimate form
somewhat
of
tainted.
Doge.
Look, what Elon Musk is doing, first of all, is often illegal
Yes,
and is invading privacy of public employees and Americans more broadly, and is corrupt because he's using those powers to enrich himself. And he's
absolutely.
just taking a sledgehammer to government and he's firing air traffic control
But if they
staff.
wanted to do it, if they wanted to do it right, they would be doing what you're advocating.
Yes, having said that,
Yeah.
we need to do better in government.
Mhm.
And I'll particularly say that at the city level. We've got to modernize government. We've got to bring government into the 21st century. We've got to spend taxpayer money more efficiently. There's fax machines in use in New York City government, Andrew.
I know.
And we,
I sent a fax a couple of days
oh my
ago.
God,
I
to
had
what
to
agency?
I had to upload something to CSIS, or the Special Education Information System, and it was
There you go.
I
There you
was,
go.
am I in 1990?
Wild.
Yeah,
2025, we're still
yeah,
doing that.
yeah.
Yeah, so we it's hurting us. It's hurting the city. um, we're talking a lot about affordable housing here. You have to add 18 months to the approval process for any affordable housing project because you got to wait for HPD to approve the loan documents and the term sheets and all that. And that's 18 months that a family's in a homeless shelter that they could have been in their housing sooner. I think that process could probably be streamlined and technology could help and we could do that. I don't see why it couldn't be done in 18 days instead of 18 months.
Are you talking about
And
when you say technology, are you talking about AI? What technology are you thinking about?
yeah, look, that potentially I want to be careful because that term inspires lots of fears and justifiably. But a lot of the loan documents are 98% templates and there's some variation, but I think that some sort of automation could speed that up, make the job of city workers easier. Uh, I don't, on any circumstances, wouldn't support laying off anybody. But I think you could have a win-win where technology could make the job of public workers easier and produce better results for taxpayers and for the public. And I think doing affordable housing more quickly would be just a perfect way to do that. So I'm I'm thinking deeply about this. I think the comptroller's office is the perfect platform to do this. They really fight for modernizing, streamlining government with public workers as partners, producing better results for taxpayers and for recipients of services across every city agency.
Okay, excellent. So, what about you mentioned pensions before? So, uh, my union, your former union, the UFT, has been fighting for about 2 years now to get the state legislature to reform Tier 6 because the way it works now is I'll be working until I'm practically dead, and so. What, if anything, can the controller do, or what would you do as controller
Look,
to?
I strongly support reform of Tier 6 and will do everything I can to help our allies in Albany win this fight. We have a lot of people fighting up there. Those rules, the rules about pensions, are set by the state legislature, by the state government. So there would not be a direct role for the comptroller, but I think it's a really important platform to advocate because comptroller has an eye towards the budget and has a sense on what we can handle and what's financially prudent. And I will make the case. I am making the case that these kinds of modest reforms to structure of pensions will help us retain great talent among DOE staff for really a modest increase in cost. And so I think it would be prudent policy. I can use my authority if I'm lucky to be the comptroller to make that case, and potentially even use research that we do out of the office to lay out the economic arguments for that case. I'll be all in on that fight, though. Again, ultimately it's a decision made by our leadership in Albany.
Oh, that's not promising.
Nah, look, we got good people fighting up there. We
Yeah.
do.
Well,
Uh,
I was my state senator, not my state senator technically, but she's my state senator, is Jessica Scarcella Stanton.
rock
Yeah,
star.
she's been all over that, and so I'm hopeful that something at least will get done. Now, my next question is about transparency. Uh, we've seen just over the Mayor Adams' term in office, just the worst kinds of corruption and malfeasance. And even before this stuff with the Trump administration,
Yeah,
um, when he goes and proposes budgets that cut schools and libraries
yeah,
and fundings, and then his girlfriend has a job with the chancellor, and the chancellor's
yeah.
girlfriend has a job with him, it makes it very hard to trust where money is going. And even before that, you had Bill de Blasio and Shirlene McClay losing $800 million for this Thrive NYC program. So I'm one of those people who always says, let's tax people, let's make everybody, the wealthiest, pay their fair share. but it's a hard case to make when, money just sort of disappears like that. So what would you do to increase transparency in city government as controller?
Yeah, I mean, I do want to say that you mentioned a lot of concerning hires that the mayor made. I actually consider David Banks to have been a great chancellor, and Sheena Wright to have been a great deputy mayor. Of all the constellation of characters in that administration, nearly all of which are gone now, those are two that I actually feel good about. But even before the criminal charges, there were real problems at City Hall and real problems with city government. And it's only gotten worse now that we have a president who's literally got uh,
He's got a gun to the
prosecutorial, yeah, I mean, a
Yeah.
prosecutorial gun to his head. Use whatever analogy you want.
Hmm.
Uh, it's in writing. It was
Yeah.
written in writing
Yeah.
that
But he said
they
that,
reserved.
yeah, there
Right.
was
It's
no,
not hinted. They said
yeah.
we reserve the right to resume
Yeah.
this criminal case.
And they don't dispute the facts either. They just say, well, it's just going to make it harder for him to help us
Yes,
in the immigration. Yeah.
you're absolutely and laid out immigration specifically. And look, I want to say quite clearly that um, it's really disingenuous to say that we've never deported uh, undocumented immigrants who've committed violent acts. It's always been the policy, and
Yeah.
it should be. You commit a violent act, dude. Yeah, yes, you should
Yeah.
be subject to deportation. But what we're talking about here is something more. We're talking about terrorizing families, and it
Children.
is happening now, Andrew, on Staten Island as well, where you're seeing families not comfortable sending their kids to school because of fear of ICE. And you know, Trump is deliberately putting that fear out there. He is making it quite clear that he intends to go after everybody, all 13 million undocumented immigrants. And this would be devastating for New York City. There
Yeah.
are, in many
a-
cases, families with mixed status where one member's a citizen, one member's a green card holder, another's undocumented. The
Absolutely.
families are working and paying taxes, and they are living in fear right now. And that's not good for New York. And we need to stand up against that. We need the mayor to stand up against that. Um, we need to reassure New Yorkers, immigrant families, that the city is not going to stand for ICE going willy nilly through public schools or churches or hospitals. That we want those to remain sites where people can feel safe. God forbid an undocumented immigrant doesn't feel safe going to the ER.
Yeah.
How's that good for New York City?
Or
That's
reporting, or even reporting a crime against them.
yeah,
Yeah.
yes. Or reporting a crime as a victim,
Yeah.
or speaking up as a witness to helping solve a crime. And I want to give the relatively new-ish police commissioner, who's a friend of mine, Jessica Tisch, credit. I want to give her credit for how she's leading the department overall, which we can talk about. But I want to say she said very clearly, NYPD doesn't participate in civil immigration enforcement. Yes, if you're going after someone who's got criminal charges, violent
Crazy
crime,
stuff.
what they've been accused of, then of course NYPD is doing that. They should do that. But this idea of a willy-nilly, uh, broad, even random targeting of immigrants, she said that's not the NYPD's job. And I admire her for saying that, and I support her in that.
So, do you think that the mayor should resign?
I have been extremely vocal about my concerns. I think probably the governor has struck the right balance right now, where she put some significant restrictions in place. There's real oversight powers now that the governor has. She also empowered comptroller and the city council speaker and public advocate to sue the federal government, put resources on the table to give them that power in case the mayor refuses to. And she's monitoring this day to day. Uh, So I do feel like the removal of Eric Adams or of a mayor by a governor, it's an unprecedented step. It's never happened in the history of New York State, and doesn't mean it shouldn't be done. Uh, Powers in the Constitution, but I do worry a little bit about a precedent that could be set and used by a future Republican governor. So I think the option's on the table. Governor's made it clear it remains an option, and it should be. But in the meantime, I think that she has struck the right balance.
Really, I don't think I don't see it that way just because a lot of the proposals that she had requires legislative approval, and who knows if that's going to happen. So it seemed like a band-aid over a gushing wound for now, and something really to solve one of many problems that she has. But I think that perhaps, the calls for him to resign should be louder. Do it on his own. I think
Oh,
do it.
he's made it clear he's not resigning. Right. The question
Yeah.
on the table is should the governor remove him?
Mhm.
And there's another mechanism um, where actually a committee of city council speaker, deputy mayor, uh, the corporation council, the most senior borough president, comptroller can vote, called a committee on inability if they believe that the mayor's not capable of pursuing his or her job. But I think it was really designed for medical incapacitation.
Like the
So
25th Amendment, like the 25th Amendment, basically.
it's New York City's analogous. It's not done by the cabinet. It's this committee of different elected leaders. Uh, and I don't think it applies in this case because the mayor, for whatever other problems he has, is not facing a medical crisis that we know of. So, um, but I was really alarmed at the resignation of these four highly respected deputy mayors a couple of weeks ago. You know, all four of them, they are really quality civil servants and leaders for New York. Their departure will leave a massive void. So I'm quite concerned, quite alarmed, and we got 10 months to go. Uh, so I think all of us should be worried about it.
Yeah, and so you are competing in a primary, but New York City primaries are different. Our listeners should know we do have ranked choice voting. Um, and so I presume you're going to tell our listeners to rank you number one. Um,
Yes, I am.
and so just explain to our listeners just how it works, because usually by the time, once you get for me, you know, all I really get about it is this that you could rank one through five, and after that you lose me. I know there's multiple
Yeah,
ranks,
yeah, 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 yeah. Yes, yes,
but
yes, yes, yes. You know, it's sometimes called instant runoff voting. And the idea in New York City forever was if no one got, actually, it was about 40%, but if no one got near to a majority, then we'd have to show up again in 2 weeks and vote again. And the top two finishers would duke it out. That's very expensive, takes time, and there were problems with that system. Turnout dropped off a lot between the primary and the runoff. And the idea of ranked choice voting is we're kind of running a series of instant runoffs. And um, it happens through this ranking system where we line everyone up. If in the first round someone gets more than 50% of the first choice votes, we're done. That person wins the primary. And that does happen, particularly if you have a limited number of candidates or if you have a really dominant candidate in the field.
yeah.
If no one's over 50% in the first round, and
Mhm.
look, if you're going to have 3, 4, 5, 8, 11 candidates, probably no one's going to be over 50% in the first round.
Mhm.
Then the lowest finisher, they drop out.
They're done.
And
Okay.
you take their votes and you divide them up to whoever the people who rank that last place finisher first. Where do they put their number twos? And you divide them up in the other candidates. Now, maybe that little bit will push someone over 50%. And if it doesn't, well, the next bottom person, you take them out, you look at where did their next choice votes go, and you pile them into the appropriate candidates. And you can kind of see you go round by round by round, you keep eliminating until one candidate gets over 50%, or if you're down to the last two, whoever gets the majority. And it actually uh, really played out with the impact in the mayoral race of 2021.
Yes, I
And
remember not knowing right away, and I was so well, now I those feelings are amplified even more. I've ranked Catherine Garcia number one, and
right,
I was really like I was like, oh, come on, and then of course Adams eked it out just above her. But well, thank you for explaining that because I am
yeah,
it's sort of like electoral Squid Game. It's sort of like
yeah, something like that, something like
yeah.
that. Yeah, it was interesting in 2021 because Eric Adams had a pretty big lead when the round one votes were announced, and the round one votes are announced on election night generally, but it takes a while for the tabulation of the ranked choice, and so we were all waiting for, I forget how long, but I think over a week. And if you looked at the ranked choice rounds, the gap narrowed. So Eric Adams didn't do well in ranked choice. Uh, I guess he wasn't a lot of people's number twos and number threes. And Captain Garcia almost won
Yeah, yeah.
by the final round. The margin was just a few thousand votes. And with hindsight, a lot of people said, well, if the other candidates had coordinated amongst each other to share each other's twos and threes, then probably Eric Adams would not have won. And I think there's a lot of people now in 2025 who are trying to game this out. And I think you'll see a lot of alliance building this time in a way you didn't see 4 years ago. It really could change the outcome.
Well, I'm hoping that if Adrienne Adams gets into the mayor's race, that maybe she could make a deal with some of the other people in the race to blunt, the former governor, who I think would have equally as damaging impacts in City Hall as the current mayor has. But I want to ask you about some Staten Island issues.
Sure.
So there's been a lot of pushback on Staten Island, but certainly around the city. I mean, you saw Donald Trump improve his performance in New York City from about 36% in 2016 to about 43% in 2024. And in part, that's in large part what I'm sensing is public safety, quality of life. That's what people say when you
Yeah.
ask them why they voted for Donald Trump. And somebody told me that they have to wait an eternity to at CVS to open up the thing to get the
Yeah.
deodorant out. And so I know controller has limited authority as far as public safety is concerned, but how do you balance
Yeah.
public
Well,
safety?
well look, on the Trump stuff, Andrew, the state in America that had the biggest swing to Trump was New York.
Yeah.
We had a 12-point swing. But if you look at New York City, we had an even bigger swing, 16 points.
Mhm.
What's really dramatic is if you look neighborhood by neighborhood. And it really was working class neighborhoods of color in the five boroughs where you saw the biggest swing to Trump. It wasn't Brooklyn Heights or the Upper West Side. And I think it's really incumbent on us as Democrats to listen to those voters and understand why they left the Democratic Party in the presidential vote. I live in Washington Heights in Uptown Manhattan, and we had a big swing to Trump. And it was particularly marked amongst Latino voters. And I can tell you, they say just what you said: concerns about public safety, concerns about homelessness, uh, how hard it is to run a business, and how expensive New York City is, how hard it is to find affordable housing. We better not just listen. We better actually have plans to change this, or we're going to lose those voters.
Yeah.
One time is a one-off. That's an aberration. They're not MAGA cult types, but if they vote Republican in two, three, four election cycles, then it just becomes habit. Can't let that happen. We have
Yeah.
got to do better on
Yeah.
on public safety.
We do. And I think, I think Trump kind of has this magic that draws in people who don't traditionally vote Republican. I'm not sure if it'll translate beyond him. If I should say, if we have elections, let's, let's,
Wow. Yeah.
I mean, that's where we are. And so,
But on the public safety front,
yeah.
look, I think a lot about this because uh, I I know we have to do better.
Hmm.
If people don't feel safe on the subway, New York City doesn't work. We need people to feel safe on mass transit. And in general, a lot of this, Andrew, is connected to a broken mental health system.
Hmm.
And uh, we have really dramatically lost capacity for long-term inpatient treatment of people with psychiatric illness.
Yeah.
Um, Bellevue Hospital, which is the main hospital provider in Manhattan for psychiatric inpatient psychiatric care, they, their facility's tiny. Their extended care unit has 19 beds. That's it. Very hard to get admitted. The state uh, psychiatric hospital in Manhattan, which may actually be where patients from Staten Island go, because there's no state psychiatric hospital in Staten Island, if I'm not mistaken. The hospital in Manhattan's on Randall's Island. This facility, which I visited, uh, had 4,000 patients at its heyday. It's now got 400, 90% reduction. So
Wow.
we just don't have the beds. There's people on the street with untreated schizophrenia that should be in inpatient treatment that don't have a bed to go to. So we've got to expand capacity. Also, the rules about providing involuntary treatment need to be changed. And the tragedy of mental illness is that often people don't want to come in for treatment. And that's when we have to have involuntary.
We have to make
Uh,
history.
yeah. And I want to credit Governor Hochul, who proposed a change on this. The standard now is you have to be a danger to yourself or others. And really, you've got to say, I'm going to kill myself, or tell someone I'm going to kill you, or maybe even push them or assault them in some way. But Governor Hochul said, look, if you're out there in the winter with no shoes and an untreated wound, you're a danger to yourself.
Yeah.
And if you're not able to care for your basic physical needs, you're a danger to yourself. And you should be brought in. You should see a doctor in the ER, and they should assess you whether you need to be admitted for long-term care. That's going to require some legislative changes in Albany, which the governor proposed, and I support. And I'm hoping they will pass. But I think that will do a lot to address the broken mental health system. And I met with Commissioner Tisch a couple days ago, and she's really pushing more enforcement on lower level offenses in mass transit. And I think that's needed
Hmm.
um, because it is part of why people feel unsafe on mass transit. So there's work to do. I think the current police commissioner has the right idea. Now, she needs more cops. We have close to 3,000 vacancies at the NYPD. We're
Wow.
budgeted for 25, for, we're budgeted for 35,000. We have not much more than 32,000. Every precinct command is down, including the precincts on Staten Island, what their head count should be. And that is hampering our ability to do this work. So um, there's, I hope, a new police academy class coming through this year shortly. I think a very large one that will help. But we're going to have to close the staffing gap at the PD to address these problems.
Wow. I didn't, well, the Bellevue thing, really. I mean, that's what,
Stunning,
yeah.
stunning.
My God, 4,000 to now 400.
That's Randall's Island. Bellevue was simply 19 beds. It's outrageous.
My God.
Yeah.
Oh, oh boy. Now, finally, my last question is about congestion pricing. So,
Yep.
congestion pricing is not popular here in our little forgotten borough.
I know that. Yeah.
It's and that goes across party lines. Our
I know that.
Democratic officials and our Republican officials are equally opposed. They were expressed relief when President Trump intervened and withdrew the federal authorization a few days ago for that. But now it's just basically tied up in the courts, and who knows where it's going to land. And so,
Right.
what do you say to voters in the outer boroughs like Staten Island who think, well, this is just another fee. This is just another tax on us. Even though I know I mean, I drove into Manhattan since it happened, and the time was much quicker. I found parking much more easily. And so it's doing what it's supposed to do according to the New York Times as far as revenue is concerned. So there are legitimate cases for both. Well, this is doing what it's supposed to do, but it's also just another fee. So what do you say to
Yeah.
that?
Well, I hear this all the time from people on Staten Island and in other parts of the city that are really negative about it. I get it, and I want to hear from Staten Islanders on this, and New Yorkers in every borough. As you said, congestion is really down substantially. I think more than was predicted since the program started. I mean, crossing in the tunnels can be one half the time it took before the program was activated. And it is helping with things like bus speeds on the streets of Manhattan, but also um, the response time for police, fire, and ambulance, which had been steadily getting longer and longer because of just choking levels of congestion. So, those are improvements. And if the program is canceled, it will mean a $15 billion hole blown in the capital budget for the MTA, which we're relying on to renovate stations and put in elevators and uh, buy new, more modern train fleets, modernize signaling systems, and all that would be in jeopardy if the program is canceled. There are exemptions, and I think there's talk about possibly expanding them. Uh, uh, I will say that anyone who's got disability can apply for an exemption because we understand mass transit's not accessible in
Yeah,
most stations, and that's a really important program that your listeners should know about. There also is a rebate for low income people that perhaps could be expanded to a higher income threshold. And I am concerned about city workers like
teachers.
firefighters and police officers
Yeah.
who are assigned to somewhere and maybe need to carry heavy gear, and it just wouldn't be practical. And so maybe this needs to be in the contract, but that cost shouldn't fall on the worker. There should be uh, an allowance made that if you have to work inside the zone, that um, that you don't have to incur a cost if you have to carry equipment around or do other things that you really have no choice but to use a car. So um, I think there's ways the program could be tweaked and improved, and some of that's on the table in Albany. But in the meantime, it is great that we have less congestion and great that we have uh, this important revenue coming in to improve mass transit.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Mark Levine, for coming on the Left in the Forgotten Borough podcast. This was a terrific discussion. This is the Left in the Forgotten Borough podcast, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you so much, Andrew. It was a real pleasure.